Hello, welcome to episode 2 of Through Their Eyes, the podcast. Today, I'm happy to have a fantastic guest here, which is Lieutenant General Sir Mark Manns. Mark, we've known each other quite a while now, eh?
Yeah.
So, geez, for those that don't know you, I mean, I know plenty in the Corps know you, at the Corps of Royal Engineers, for those that are not in the Royal Engineers. Give us a bit of your background.
Yeah, well, delighted to be here, Billy. And as I say, we've known each other personally through the charity, I think, for almost 10 years, probably just over. But yeah, I've served in the Army for almost 45 years, joined at 18. Was very lucky to end up being a general, Lieutenant General, as you've said. And my last sort of jobs in the Army was Chief Royal Engineer, because we're both Royal Engineers, sappers by background. And I was also what was known as the Adjutant General, and it was the top of the Army. It's the job nobody else wanted. In other words, it was the principal personnel officer, and nobody else wanted it because it dealt with all the difficult issues, and I was responsible for things like homeland security, which were difficult, but actually was very rewarding. But all personnel policies, health, basing, infrastructure, and all those things that senior Army officers would prefer not to deal with. So I had that sort of responsibility. But it was important because I also dealt with charities as well. It gave me a broad perspective.
So we kind of joined the Army at the same time, roughly about the same time, 1970s, like our careers couldn't have been more different. I found coming from an area of Glasgow, like we didn't meet kind of officer types, and when I joined the Army, there was that class system, I think, and a perceived class system. I don't know if it was there, it's what we perceived it to be, and where officers didn't really talk to the guys and the guys didn't really talk to the officers, that we didn't have that kind of relationship. I know that's kind of changed now, but how did you see that from the officer's side? How was that?
I think, Billy, in those days, the Army was a lot bigger. But we were mostly focused on the Cold War. Most of the Army was deployed in Germany. And it was a very ordered existence. Mm-hmm. So that officer-soldier sort of divide, if you can call it that, was there. But I think as the Army got smaller, but then got busier with the operations in Iraq and Afghanistan more latterly, the officer-soldier relationship became more important. And there was much better understanding from both parties, because you really are living and fighting, alongside one another. But you're right. I think in the early days, there was that officer-soldier relationship at times was a little bit awkward. I was lucky in that I used to play a lot of sport, and on the rugby field, you didn't use sirs all that much. It was always Christian names. But obviously off the field, then, you were back to using rank and then the respect that was needed.
Well, I think that's important. That respect is really important, that you can't have a familiarity, but there is a time where you have to show that respect. Even you coming here, sometimes I still call you sir, or I still call you, whatever it is, because that's that. And I know you said to me an email one time, you can just call me Mark now. But there's still a part of you that wants to show that respect. And I think, I still feel it's important that we show that respect, but you can still be friends at the same time.
Yeah, I think exactly that, Billy. It's understanding respect of whether it's human beings, the rank or the hierarchy or whatever. It's that deeper understanding. And therefore, it's not all about what you call and by people by names or rank or what have you. It's that understanding. And there's a time and place for everything.
Absolutely. There's a time when we relax, even on tour or anything there's a time you relax, you do like your hair done a bit. And although you get familiar with an officer, you still have that respect here,
Absolutely.
Because when you're on tour, whatever the tours we did, I wouldn't say they're the same as Afghanistan and Iraq, but we still had that operational kind of value there, that you had to, it had to be.
I think ultimately, again, this is an issue. When you're on operations and you're in charge, whether you're an officer or a senior NCO, you will be giving orders, telling people to put themselves in harm's way. Mm-hmm. And there can't be any sort of discussion of saying, oh, Jim, I'm not sure I want to do that. You absolutely have to understand your position. And if you're ordered or told to do something in a very, very tight spot, you have to do it. And therefore, there are occasions where familiarity actually has got too great, and therefore it does undermine the operational situation in that sense.
And I agree with that too. There has to be that kind of division in some, because you are ordering people to do things that are pretty dangerous. There has to be that. And so that brings me on to another question about, like, so when you do go out on or send guys out on the ground and something happens, how is that as an officer? We know how it happens on the ground with the guys, like, but how is that as an officer? Certainly the further you go up the ranks, how does that,
Yeah, I see as you get more experienced, I'm a great believer in intuition, which is born of experience, understanding, training. It's a whole amalgam of issues. And as you get more senior, you make decisions. Sometimes, certainly in an operational situation, you make them very quickly. You have to. And when you look back on them, it's quite difficult to analyze the detail of why you made that decision, but it was born of intuition and so on. When you are in a position of responsibility and you're potentially putting people in harm's way, you're always doing what I would call constant sort of risk assessments, just making sure that you are going to make, hopefully, the right decision and what have you. And it is that constant process, because the times I've been on operations where sadly I've had soldiers injured or whatever, then, you do look back and say, could I have done it differently and what have you. So it's a learning experience. Yeah,
and I think that's a life decision as well, isn't it? We go through that through our whole life of making sometimes wrong decisions, but for the right reasons. So it's the same in operations, isn't it? Like, where the pressure is on to make a decision. And the thing is, somebody has to make a decision. So something has to be done that has to be done quickly. So I take my hat off to the officers that make the decisions. I mean, I have to do some of that now in a different kind of vein. And I know sometimes I don't get it right, but you're always doing it with the right intent to do the best you can do for the people you're working with.
And I think, Billy, you're right. I think it's actually, if I'm honest, in terms of when you're in a position of authority, making decisions and so on outside of the military arguably is more difficult. We live in a very hierarchical, within the military, within the army, very hierarchical. Everyone knows their place and what have you. But since retiring from the army about 10 years ago, I set up my own consultancy and advise some very big companies on mostly defense, but on also technology issues. And actually seeing how they operate, I thought, goodness me, they've got to be more careful. They've got to think about the money. They've got to think about their relationships with people. And when individuals change quite a lot, as they do in business, you're constantly having to reassess human behavior and what have you. And I think it's more difficult in that respect. So in one sense, we've been fortunate being in the army.
Did you feel that throughout your long career, 40 odd years now, you must have seen the transition of how we hear guys our age saying that was tougher nowadays. No, life was just different. We didn't fight in Afghanistan and Iraq, so I mean the soldiers today are the same caliber as, or even more, than we were. What I would say with that is, did you see the progression, the change, and then you had to change how you control things, and how you were as an officer and how you dealt with people?
Yeah, I think, well, first of all, about the individuals in the army now compared to when we were. And I think the young men and women, both soldiers and officers, frankly, are of a higher caliber than when I joined. And I'm not being any disrespectful to the likes of you and I and so on, but we demand an awful lot of our young soldiers and young officers, both on and off operations. And it was highlighted in graphic detail in Iraq and Afghanistan, where some of the things young men and women had to do was very powerful, and they did it extremely well. So when I look back to 40 years ago, 45 years ago, more than that, 50 years ago, when I was first serving in the Royal Engineers, yes, we did a good job, but we were not under a lot of pressure in those days and what have you. So I take my hat off to the young men and women in the army today.
Look, we hear people saying, if it came to a war now, nobody would sign up. Well, the biggest recruitment was during Afghanistan and Iraq. So young people from all over the country joining up to do the job that needed done over a long period of time. And And you've got to take your hat off to them. So I still believe in the British public that if it came to something happening right now, I still think they would stand up and fight.
Yeah, I think you're right, Billy. I think, as you said, a war, a conflict is a great recruiting machine. It enables people to join. And there's something, I think, in the British psyche of wanting to do good. And that's a big motivator. And we shall see, history has an awful habit of repeating itself in terms of conflicts and wars. And, I think people will be ready when the call comes.
I agree. And I think there's another element to that. Something you just said there is that when we're serving, certainly in the Royal Engineers, I can't talk for any other unit out there, but I know they're involved. We do more than fighting, don't we? We build things, we make things, we change people's lives in some really remote areas all across the world where I think we used to call it, was it military age or civilian community? We build things, we change lives. And they're always in the worst places you can imagine. Like there was, and then when you handed that job over at the end, that feeling of achievement.
Well, I think you're right. I think, because we're both Royal Engineers by background, we've had a privileged, we've learnt a lot because we've always supported others, not only the Army, the Navy and the Air Force, the Royal Marines within the Navy. And what the sappers do, the sort of the phrase that everyone uses, they enable the armed forces to live, move and fight. Says it all. Yeah. Says it all. So we're lucky. We've actually, in our careers, we've seen what we can do in support of others in some pretty extreme circumstances. And you learn a lot, therefore, about yourselves and about others in that context.
Which, in reality, was the catalyst for me doing what I'm doing now, which I'm sure we'll get into in a little bit later. But that was the kind of background that I took to do what I do now, that. And it was always with that tagline, help yourself by helping others. How good does it make you feel? But one of the other things I wanted to say to you was, did you ever feel, sadly there was a Royal Marine officer a few years ago in Winchester took his own life. Now, I'm not asking you if that's what you're in your thoughts, but did you ever feel at any point you were isolated the higher you went up the ranks? Did you ever feel that you were isolated because you were the one making the decisions? Everybody was kind of around about you, but who did you speak to?
I think it's a very good point, Billy, because the more senior you get, whether it's in the military or any organisations, the more of you're on a pedestal. And sometimes that can be very unnerving and can be very isolating. And certainly as I got more senior, there were times where you did feel isolated, but you had that responsibility and what have you. I remember one of my staff saying to me when I was doing my last job in the Army, he said to me, General, why do we always have to deal with the difficult issues? And I said, well, because all the easy issues are dealt with further down. All the difficult issues will rise to the top. And it's those with experience and do it. But in terms of how I dealt with that as an individual, if there was pressure on, and of course there was, I always used to go back to what my father used to say to me. My father was a general as well in the Army. He said, always keep something in reserve, both mentally, physically, or whatever. And that stayed with me. I thought when there were times when I felt under a lot of pressure, I had to make sure I could still step up, for want of a better term, so I wasn't completely overawed by the situation.
And I think that's what makes a difference, having that capacity to do that. Unfortunately, for many people, that they don't have that capacity.
Yeah, right.
And I suppose that's what makes you a senior officer rather than a junior officer, or a senior rank. Because we have to make these split decisions in life that not only affect us, but affect everybody around about us. And sometimes that decision can be hard because everybody's looking to you to have the answer. And sometimes you go inside and you go, I don't know how to deal with this. And I know that happened to me on an expedition in 2018 where we rolled a vehicle down a mountain in Bosnia. And all eyes turned to me and I'm thinking, I don't know what to do. Yeah. But in the end, you have to make a decision. And that's how you come through it, I think.
And that's a good example of true leadership. It's only people can lead when everything's going well. Mm-hmm. It's when they go wrong and so on. I always remember an officer who was more senior to me years ago said, I'm not too interested in the problems. I'm more interested in how people deal with the problems. because that's when the true leaders actually step up and deal. Some of those problems can be of enormous magnitude.
Yeah, and look, cometh the man and all that type thing. Like, like it's when you step up, people then look to you even more, like, for the decisions you're going to make. That incident in Bosnia, like, I'd never served in Bosnia, so Serbo-Croat, for me, you may as well have been speaking Martian. There was not a single word I could understand. And everybody's looking at me to understand what the Serbs or the kind of locals were saying to us, the Bosnians were saying to us. And I had no clue. But you get by somehow, don't you? You always find a way to get by. And I think that's the thing I hold on to now, is that I'm very quick to make a decision, because a decision has to be made in these situations. And that particular time, I'm with a lot of guys with PTSD. And if you didn't make a decision, it makes their issues even more.
And I think, Billy, it comes back to what I was saying about intuition. You almost certainly made those based on your military background and what have you, which was instinctive. And that's why it's important in terms of what the charity does. It's getting people to think back to the good times in the military, the camaraderie, the teamwork and everything else. And that's what's really important, because that's what enables you, to actually further yourself, later on. So it's a good example.
I think if we're not putting our mind at stretch, we just stay in a comfortable position. But we're not getting much with that. We have to kind of take ourselves out of that comfort zone to actually grow. And that's kind of our methodology here. Is like we want people to grow, but we want to do it because they want to do it. Like that. It's not a case of you need to do that. You have to want to get better. You have to want to do things that maybe you'll find uncomfortable at first. Yeah. And I think, how many times have we been sat in a hole in Germany, like, and but then there's always a laugh from somewhere else, isn't there? And you just get through all the rough times.
But I think it's one, and we've talked before about what the Veterans in Action does, and it's sort of its model. You have the alive concept and so on. And I've talked before about focusing on the team, the task, and the individual. And it's actually, I pinched the idea, for want of a better term, from someone called John Adair, who was very, he produced this model for leadership, goes back a number of years, but it all revolves around team, task, and individual, and looking after their needs. And I think that model, does read across very well to Veterans in Action, because I've used that. When people talk to me and say, "Oh, you're the patron of Veterans in Action," what do they do? And it's actually not that easy at times when you're actually trying to explain people who have got severe mental health issues and problems, how you go about helping them. So I said, well, the model that I've used of task, team, and individual is important, because the task, it's achieving or accomplishing tasks in order to achieve a sense of achievement, or to gain a sense of achievement. So that's the task. The team, it's all about teamwork, to actually help bond, but to actually probably go back and to remember the good times in terms of the camaraderie you had within the military. And then the individual bit, it's all about supporting the individual, so they feel a sense of self-worth. And in that way, where the three come together, that's exactly what VIA does.
It's basically the model, like it's not the way I wrote it, but it's basically the model. It's for me, it's about, if you can give somebody purpose, they've got a reason to get out of bed in the morning, they can come and be in an environment where they understand, with the language they understand, the setting they understand. We're certainly not trying to make people into soldiers again. That's the last thing we're trying to do. We're trying to say, use who you are to improve your life. And I fully believe that you can live with post-traumatic stress. Some days it's going to come and bite you, and it's how you get through that when it bites you. But in general, if we sit at home and do nothing, we stay exactly as we are. But if we make a choice to do something, we change. That's the kind of model. Yeah. And you do that with the peer support of people just like yourself going through the exact same things and how they support each other through.
Yeah. And I think, Billy, it's ever more important because, again, what the charity does, which is activity-based, which is very important. In these days where technology rules our lives, we have we can sit at home, have what we might consider to be a very fulfilling life and not ever leave home or interact with other humans because of the technology. I think for somebody who has a mental health illness and is ill, it's important to break away because that feeling of isolation can become overbearing, or overpowering. And therefore, the activity of doing things together with fellow human beings is so important in terms of helping.
I think the hardest thing for any organisation, not just Veterans in Action, is getting somebody to come in the first place. My job here is to challenge how they move forward. So it's easier to do nothing than it is to do something. So my challenge to them is if you come, you just get involved, no matter what level that's at when you first come. Because it looks quite intimidating when you come to our place when we're building vehicles and stuff like that. But that's just a tool. Everything we do here is a tool for people to grow. So we've got to get them involved in the things that they want to do, including what we're doing right now. This is a veterans project, what we're doing right now. And so they've set it up. They've built the room. They've set the lights up. They've did all this stuff. So what we're doing is we're giving them something to get their teeth into that it's completely different from what they've done before. Does that mean they're all going to get in front of a camera? Absolutely not. That's not the point. The point is some will, some won't, but we'll find what's right for the individual.
Yeah, and you're to a degree forcing people to actually push their own boundaries, to get them to do things they wouldn't unnaturally do. There's a phrase, you can take a horse to water.
Absolutely.
But sometimes you've got to cut off its legs to make it drink.
Yeah.
So you've got to force people. You've got to put them in a difficult situation, a controlled difficult situation for them to actually learn, say, actually, no, I can do better. I can help myself.
It's to challenge their thinking.
Yeah.
So I hear so many veterans say, I don't sleep at night time. And I go, right, okay, that's fine. What's keeping you awake? So I sleep during the day, or I do this, or I play my PlayStation till 5 o'clock in the morning and go to sleep, and I'm up, and then I can't sleep at night. So there's, if we look at that, if we break that down, it's not rocket science. And I don't think anything is rocket science to do with what we do. I think all you do is build a platform. And I'll look at back at engineering terms because that's what we understand. If you build a good foundations, and then you can grow in the foundations. If we have shaky foundations to start with, it's never going to last. And I think since I've been doing this 17 years now, and this is not to criticise any organisation. We put people into therapy, we send them back home. They go back home and do the exact same things again, and then they end up back in therapy again. We have to change that cycle. We have to include activity in there, not just from Veterans in Action, organisations all over the country that do active work with veterans. And in a combination with therapy and medication and the activity, will get them where they need to be. And that's going to be different for every single individual.
Yeah. Excuse me. No, I think you're right, Billy. And it is that. It's a very interesting point because sometimes people talk to me about Veterans in Action and say, okay, you run these expeditions and these activity-based that we do in this country. What happens afterwards? And of course, this is the crucial point.
100%.
And perhaps tell me because I need to sort of when I explain that to people, I say, the centre's always there, but we need people. They can't be here all the time.
So the visual part of what we do is the vehicles and expeditions. That's the visual part of the work we do. The vehicles is just a methodology. So people think we build vehicles. We don't build vehicles. Or we do, but what we do is we build people. The methodology we use is to build vehicles. And so that's the long-term, the everyday aspect of what we do. Not just the vehicles, how we film the vehicles being built, how we introduce that to people. So it's not a case of come in and build a vehicle on day one. There's all sorts of projects that surround that main project. But what that main project does is allows us to look at everything that's not PTSD. So we have some fantastic people here that deal with the welfare side. You've met them. They are some of the most inspiring people I know. And what they do is really, really crucial. They look at all the welfare aspects that allow them to grow. So if you can imagine, if you're a veteran and you go and do therapies, and I'll use combat stress as an example, like fantastic therapy, 2-week or a 6-week course, really kind of in depth. You leave there feeling great. But then if you return home and do the exact same things you were doing before in the same environment, it's not going to be long lasting. So what we do, and they may go back to the red bills waiting on the carpet, like all this stuff that it weighs down on PTSD. So PTSD may be the presenting problem, but it isn't the whole problem. As we know, males are rubbish at coming forward and asking for help. They say it's around 14.1 years for a male or a veteran, as the statistics go, to then ask for help.
Really? Yeah.
5 years for a woman. So, and why is that? Because women deal with life. They have to deal with life. They have to deal with the children. They have to deal with paying the bills and that. As men, what we tend to do, and I've been one of them, that is we tend to just let the wife do it all and we don't deal with anything. So we just get ourselves in debt. We get ourselves all the stuff that surrounds PTSD, housing, family, relationships, all of this.
I think, Billy, if I just come in, it's really important from a veteran's point of view, because those that have served and that, when you are serving, your whole life is organized for you. Yes, sometimes fairly extreme circumstances, but your days and your weeks are planned out well in advance. So when you leave the military and you become a veteran and so on, sometimes just coming to grips with life in general is a challenge, and we forget that.
It's a huge point. And I know what it's like when I left the army. I didn't have a clue how to do anything. Didn't know what a P45 was. Didn't know what a P60 was. I joined straight from school. I didn't know any of that. So what we do is, certainly if you're suffering with psychological injuries as well, is we tend to just throw all that stuff away.
Yeah.
We don't deal with it. So the problems become bigger. What was started out as maybe a small problem becomes a bigger problem. And then another problem comes along, which isn't necessarily big, adds on to the other problem. And before long, it overwhelms us, all the problems, and we don't see a way out of it. What our welfare team does is break all that down, and it's in chunk-sized bits. So the reason we build Land Rovers is because it gives us the time to do that. It can take up to 18 months to build a Land Rover, sometimes longer, depends on what Land Rover we're building. And through all of that time, they're having their compensations looked at, they're having their any kind of benefits they need, any housing needs, all of this are being looked at. And all that stuff takes time. And the Land Rover gives us the time. It gives us an ongoing project. And it's not just one vehicle, as you know. There's always something to do in the vehicles. Then there's always something to film of the guys. There's all sorts of aspects that, if you can imagine two projects, one's doing filming and the other one's doing building vehicles, generally in an organization, they won't come together. But what we do is we bring all the vehicles and all the kind of projects together. So the guys film the guys building vehicles because they don't want to build vehicles themselves because that's not their interest. So you create the interest around something, around that one central project, which everybody believes what we do is build vehicles and go on expeditions. What we do is we build people to take them to a point where they want to go on an expedition.
Yeah.
And that's a really important factor. When they first come to us, they could think of nothing, that's so far away from their thinking about getting in a vehicle and traveling to, I think this year we're doing about 9 countries. So that's so far out of their thinking powerful, at the time.
Powerful.
So that length of time gives us the time to do that. So the group we're taking out this year have all worked on the vehicles or other aspects around the centre. So they've worked for their place. It's not a come and go on an expedition organisation. It's come, work to achieve that. And that's the whole idea.
Yeah. And I think that's important because, you mentioned the expedition this year, the Victory in Europe 80th anniversary and so on. Do you want to just say a little bit about that?
So I was in a meeting last year and we were looking for an idea for an expedition. My intention was to do Norway and Sweden, but then obviously we're coming to an important anniversary, and I believe is every bit as important as what last year was for the anniversary of D-Day. I think the Victory in Europe is a huge aspect. So what we did was we planned an expedition that will take in some of the key sites around Europe. And where we're going is we're starting off in Normandy, a few days in Normandy, and then we keep on moving. We're going through Belgium, Holland, Germany, into Poland, Upper Silesia and Poland, Southern Silesia, into Slovakia, Austria, back into Germany, Luxembourg, Belgium, France, UK again. And we're visiting these key sites like Auschwitz, the Wolf's Lair, some of the sites in Arnhem, all these kind of places. And the biggest one for me is, I've never been before, is Hurtgen Forest. I'd never knew much about it because it wasn't a British battle.
Yeah.
And what I found out, there was 32,000 Americans were killed there. It was actually bigger than D-Day, and nobody really knows much about it. So we're bringing a couple of Americans on the expedition with us. And the reason we're doing that is I think it's important that you don't have all the answers. None of us have all the answers. And I think it's important to talk to other people and other nationalities that are working with PTSD and finding where our ideas align, what new ideas they can bring to us, what new ideas we can pass on to them, and have that shared experience of the work we're doing. So I've literally, in this year, I've helped an organisation help with their procedure of starting a charity up in the United States, and they're called Fox Bravo. They do something similar to us, but they're just at the start point, and I've been there, so I know what it's like. So I've been giving them some ideas of how we've done things, and they've taken some of them on. They'll do their own thing, obviously, and myself and one of the guys are going to join them on an expedition later on this year to maybe pass our experience on to them.
I think that's really powerful, because one of the issues we've talked about before is collaboration. We talk in terms of collaborating with charities in this country, with who are focused on mental health issues. But I think what you've just said is very powerful. It's collaboration, with other veterans in other countries. And America is an obvious choice, but will be others. And I dare say, during the expedition this year, where you go around Europe, you'll be interacting with veterans organizations from those countries. And again, they will learn lessons from us and we'll learn lessons from them. And that's very powerful.
Like when I first started doing what I'm doing now, I never looked to the UK. I'd been to therapy myself. It wasn't for me. Now I kind of know I probably wasn't ready for therapy at that time. So I kind of said what I needed to say to the psychologist to get back out the door again and carry on. And then, like for me, it was about what worked for me as an individual, because it's different for every single one of us. And I think that's an important factor to learn. So one shoe doesn't fit all. We need to work out what works for individuals. So Veterans in Action isn't going to be an organisation for everybody, and rightly so. But we need to connect to the organisations that may be right for that veteran. So if somebody's doing bushcraft, I know a fantastic organisation called Hidden Valley Bushcraft down in Somerset. If it's you want adrenaline rush, go to Mission Motorsport, get thrown around a racetrack. There's lots of things, and we can collaborate with. It builds a bigger picture of veterans organisations and brings them closer to working together. And that means we're working for the veteran as opposed to working for the organisation. So we're then given what they need as opposed to what we want them to do.
And of course, you've just outlined those organisations, and it's activity based. It goes back to what we were saying before. It's doing things together as a group, as a team, and actually getting people into a better place because of that.
And I think one of the other things there with that is that don't think you're the best organisation out there. You've always got things to learn, and don't think you have all the answers, because you certainly don't have all the answers. And that's the whole thing about learning all the time. Listen to other people and maybe taking a little bit of that information on and how you adapt it to what you do. And I think I watch Nick Goldsmith down at Hidden Valley Bushcraft. He's an inspirational ex-Royal Marine, inspirational guy. And I think, there's so much he can offer, and what we can offer veterans is that experience if we send somebody his way and vice versa when they've got somebody that's interested in what we do. That's the future of organisations. I think we went through a period of our isolationists, we did our own thing and we didn't really talk to anybody else. Well, that has to change. That doesn't work that way.
Yeah.
And I think particularly in our background, the Royal Engineers are very good at that because we work with everybody.
Yeah.
And so I think our background helps with that.
Yeah, I think you're right. It sort of becomes naturally to us to want to collaborate and work with others, because that's what we've done within the military and what have you. I think another important thing within charities are the actual volunteers. Obviously, it goes without saying, because as you know, I'm involved with a number of other charities, not only patron of Veterans in Action. I'm a deputy lieutenant within Hampshire, So I support the Lord Lieutenant in a variety of areas in terms of charities and voluntary organisations. I'm a county patron of the Royal British Legion. So, we're working on a slightly bigger scale in that respect. I'm also a vice patron of the Ulysses Trust, which actually supports the cadets and the reserve forces doing expeditions. And that's very rewarding, particularly, for the cadets. It's young people. I'm also a champion for the Defence Medical Welfare Service, which basically supports people with health-related issues both in and out of hospital. And for what it's worth, I'm also a member of the Scientific Exploration Society, and that does pretty much what it says on the can. Mark you, I haven't done anything recently. But what I've learned in dealing with all those charities is the volunteers. Yes, you will have the trustees who are very important and so on and how they do it. Then they have people like your gallant self, chief operating officers and what have you, and chief executive officers. But it's the next tier down. It's the volunteers. And to use a military expression, they are what I would call the lifeblood of a charity, the centre of gravity. And so now sometimes I think charities forget, not knowingly, but unknowingly, how important those volunteers, because they're unpaid, they do it because they've got a driving force. And sometimes I talk to the charity I'm involved with, I say, don't forget the volunteers, because they're the ones that actually keep the charity going.
Well, before you even said the word lifeblood, that's the word that came to my head straight away. I was thinking the exact same word before you said it, because that is the reality of it. Without the volunteers, you don't survive as an organisation, because you can't do all that work yourself. So you need people coming in with different skill sets that have got a drive to push you forward. And they're probably the ones that actually push a charity forward. Say me as an individual, I may have the ideas, but I'm not the person always to take the ideas forward. That's where the volunteers come in, and without that, you just don't move forward really.
Yeah. And because you're right, you need that sort of input from volunteers. And sometimes that's why you need new people on board to give you new insights and so on. Very powerful.
Yeah, and because you can get very comfortable as an organisation. We're happy doing what we're doing and we're okay. We just stay there. But you've known me a long time now. I'm always somebody that's looking to do something different. And I'm somebody that likes to react to situations things like COVID and Ukraine and stuff like that, like when we did stuff out there. It's about that reaction. And what you're trying to do with people is you're trying to bring the volunteers or veterans you're working with forward with you, so they want to go and do it. And again, that I'll come back to the experience of Royal Engineers. Let's go and help somebody. It makes us feel good. And I always get that. For me is always a thing. It's how I feel how I felt in the past when we built something in Belize or whatever at Kenya, whatever it may be, and how it made you feel when you handed that job over. It was just such a great feeling of achievement and knowing you'd changed somebody's life. Well, that's the same achievement I get here every day.
Well, it is exactly what I said earlier about using that model of, what you want to do with a task. You want to actually achieve a task, or to accomplish a task, to actually gain a sense of achievement. And that's what it's about. And you mentioned COVID and Ukraine there, because I think that's when the charity almost came of age, certainly with COVID, and then that sort of transcended into Ukraine. And the work the charity did supporting those in need during the COVID pandemic, and then running aid convoys, to Poland to go on into Ukraine, really gave you a focus.
It did.
And so in a bizarre way, the charity was doing great work, but you hadn't made that sort of step change. And COVID forced you into that, inevitably. But bizarrely, the charity, through helping others, has really come of age.
When COVID came along, one of our trustees came to say, "I've got an idea," and I'm like, "I'm not really keen on this." Like an ex-sapper, Carl Atkinson, or Weasel as he's called. You'll hate me saying that. So he came with the idea and we'd do this, and we clashed a little bit on it, like we always do. And rightly so, because that's the character.
Well, he's now the chair.
Yes, he's now the chair of the trustees. Like we got on very well, but we do clash at times, with our ideas, and that's right. There's nothing wrong with that. And so he came up with this idea, and I went, I'm not really interested. Civil organisations, I'm the one to get involved in that. But I went anyway, and it was a local pub in Andover, and they were going to help with prescriptions and stuff like that. And I come away from there. We did a leaflet drop for them. This is right on day one of COVID, or just before it came in. We did a leaflet drop and say this is what we're going to do. And I came back and I thought, COVID hadn't really closed us down. We hadn't in lockdown at this time. And I came back and I went, what do I really want to do? I said, like, I'm sure there's more we can do than give out leaflets and an odd prescription. And then the lockdown came, and I thought, how do we survive as a charity? Never mind doing lockdown. How do we survive as a charity? Is because our fundraising was always physical fundraising. We went out and we fundraised 3, 4, 5 times a week. We couldn't do that anymore. So how do we survive? So I moved into the centre. I got a bed in my office, and I worked from the office, and I looked at what can we do, and I want to still continue to help people, because the people we help are the most vulnerable you can find. They lock themselves away. To get them to first come to the organisation is the hardest part. And I knew if they were forced into isolation, we may not have seen some of them again. I know that for a fact. We wouldn't have seen some of them again. So I wanted to stay open. A lot of the major charities, big charities, through the rules they had, closed down. In our area, we were the only organisation open that were physically working. So I come up with a plan that I put a call out every single night, and I'd ask for the locals over Facebook and on the Andover groups. We need this, like food, household items, that type of thing. And we started to do this over a 6-month period, and we ended up, we fed and gave people, so it was 6,000 people over that period. And it was all the veterans we worked with who would otherwise have been isolated. As I said, we may not have seen them again, who went out and did that work. And then the other thing I did during that is the rules were at the time where you could walk with one other person. So I would walk maybe 4 times a day. I'd invite somebody up and I'd go for a walk with them. So we were talking, we were kind of keeping that communication going, which kept them moving forward. And I think I walked with about 200 people in the end during that period. Then when Ukraine kicked off, we acted straight away. Because of the experience we had through the COVID thing, we acted straight away. The room we're sitting in here was packed right to the ceiling with stuff that had been donated from locals. Like we had everything from tourniquets to all sorts, a lot of medical supplies. And we started running convoys out to, we didn't go to Ukraine. Myself and Duncan Crockett, who's the operations manager here, me and him were up to the border, and we kind of drove from the Belarus, Ukraine, Poland triangle down along the Polish border to see what was happening at the borders. And we found that everything was happening anyway. Like, people were coming through, but they were coming through with suitcases. You know, they were coming through with everything. So we found some fantastic Polish partners, Peter, who we're going to go and see in our next expedition. And he was doing he was doing the real heavy lifting. We were getting the stuff to him. He was getting into Ukraine and taking it right where it needed to, Donbass and places like this. And he was doing the heavy lifting. So we take our hat off to Peter for doing that. But what it did is it gave the guys we were working with real purpose. They felt they were really achieving something. They were doing something that made them feel really good. Everybody round about them was really supportive, and it helped them move forward.
They're working together as a team.
Absolutely.
And sense of achievement again. And of course, you were using the fleet of Land Rovers we had, which is great, because you didn't have to then worry about where you're going to stop off, where you're going to sleep, and what have you, because you had the vehicles there. And
some of the journeys we did in one hit, like 22 hours out to Legnica in Poland, about 50 miles over the German border. We'd do it in one hit. Yeah. We'd just swap drivers over as we went along and sleep in the back of the vehicle.
And I remember when you came back, though, the strap line, which the charity uses now, which I think is absolutely spot on, it's helping others by helping ourselves.
And there's no better way.
No,
there's no better way.
It's a powerful sort of way of explaining. Yeah. It's all about that human interaction, but helping others as well as helping yourself.
There was a question you asked earlier on about how do you explain what the charity does when people ask you. And myself and some of the guys were down in Cornwall a good few years back fundraising. And I used to say to people, when they asked me, oh, we do expeditions on it, because that was the visual side of what we did. And for some reason, this lady came over to me, I think it was in St. Ives, and she said, tell me what the charity does. And rather than give the stock answer, I said to her, for some reason, and I don't know what reason was for this particular lady, as I said, we create new positive memories. Yeah. And that's, I think, what we do. If you can think of people suffering from mental health issues, if you ask them when the last time they were happy, it's usually before trauma. What we do is we create a new kind of timeline like for them. So when they're asked when the last time was happy, or remember we did that expedition to Greece or the Pyrenees, or they've got a new memory to fall back on, which isn't so far away.
That's fairly powerful, Billy, because you're right. And therefore, hopefully, those bad memories, fade over time, because it's the good memories and so on.
And that's the day-to-day work as well, because I say to people here, we are not the most exciting charity in the world. That you go to Mission Motorsport for and get thrown around a racetrack for that, or Team Endeavour and get thrown around in a boat. That's exciting. Ours is the grind, the day-to-day work. So there is some really, really good stuff, and we run really well. But sometimes we pick up a broom like we did in the military and we sweep up. Yeah. But we all sweep up together and we make a bit of a fun of it, and that, because that is real life. Real life isn't throwing a car around a racetrack. Not for most people anyway. Yeah. Real life is doing the day-to-day mundane things, but doing it with people you like being with and having a bit of a laugh doing it. Yeah. Because it's not all about exciting stuff.
Should we perhaps talk, I suppose it's almost the elephant in the room, funding, because the charity absolutely relies on grants, small and large, from individuals, but organisations and what have you. And it's absolutely vital to what goes on. And you and I, we've spoken before about how you go about that process, engage with that process. Because I'm not a believer in cold calling. I think those days are long gone. It's about using your networks and so on, engaging with people, explaining to people what you do. It's why we're doing this very podcast.
I mean, you've got a friend, Lamont, who have got the model right. They surrounded themselves with corporations. Team forces. They surround themselves with corporations who sponsor them. It allows us to apply for grants. That model is the future of organisations. The old way we used to fund was to go out and physically fundraise. Their days are gone. COVID put an end to that. Times have changed. Plus, people don't carry money now. It's a very true. When we first started fundraising in a physical way at football matches, rugby, people would throw money. It was the height of Afghanistan and Iraq, and people were throwing money at that point. Times have changed. We're not in the media anymore, so people don't really know that veterans need help anymore. So that kind of fundraising aspect is a thing of the past. But grants have been huge for us. The Armed Forces Community Covenant have been fantastic with us. The lottery, all these things, but you have to keep on going back. Yeah. And what I find is I enjoy working with veterans. That's where my skill set is. And my skill set is how I communicate with them and how I work with them and the ideas I bring forward. I feel my job has gone another way now. And I suppose that's what happens when you're at the top. You do the job you don't want to do, which is the more applying for grants and stuff like this. And there's a fantastic element to that. There's, I've learned new skills along the way doing that. And I've learned that how to write better, in all sorts of ways. But I do believe the future is in what we do as a physical organisation, as in we use the things we've got, the stuff we've built, the place we are, to bring corporations in to offer them something. So rather than a corporation donate us £5,000, we'll do a corporate day for you, using our vehicles, using the woods we've got to maybe do something like that. So you get something for your £5,000. You don't just give a donation. I think that's really powerful.
It's sort of almost the collaboration bit.
100%.
We talked about collaborating with other charities, but actually it's collaborating with the people who support you as well.
Yeah, and the other way of looking at it is I don't want £5,000 off an organisation. I want £5,000 every year.
Yeah.
So and so it's building them organisations around you, which is starting right now. We've got a few that's backing us now. And you want to grow from that. And if you can get 100 organisations give you $5,000 a year, you're not doing too badly, are you? And that takes time to build that. But that's the new model. And how we work with that is the veterans we work with run that.
Yeah.
So it gives them purpose again. The volunteers are involved. The veterans we work with are involved. So they're now creating something that could, in fact, create jobs in the end, you know, or give them the wherewithal to go and get a job where they never thought they would work again. So I do believe the corporate involvement is the way forward for organisations like ourselves. The fundraising won't stop. Maybe not in the way we used to do it. It might be like challenges and things like that. And the grants won't stop, but we have to stop reliance on grants, use them for where they're needed, and actually create your own funding through our projects like Made by Veterans, where we embroider clothing for businesses. And you grow that, plus the other things we can offer with our vehicles and the other aspects.
Yeah, I think you need a sort of a baseline from which you work. And you're right, the offshoots of what you do, the embroidery business as part of the charity. Yeah. You know, I wouldn't say that's a huge income spinner, but it's there. Yeah. And it helps that sort of baseline income.
If that funded one project, it's achieving its aims, you know, like, is it ever going to be a thing that funds a charity completely? Probably not. And I would say very likely not. But there's an aspect of it, you know. So one of the things we did on a corporate day recently, we got all the people to embroider their own shirt or to print their own shirt. Something they never thought they'd do. So it's all aspects we can bring in of the stuff we do as physical projects. We just use them projects. One, we gain experience by doing it, and they get a great day out as well.
Yeah, that's brilliant.
You know, So that's what I believe is the future of the charity. You know, so what about you now? What about we've spoke a lot about me, which was not the intention. What about you? What are you doing now, and what are you involved in?
Yeah, well, as I said, I'm really now. I wound up my consultancy last year. I did it for 10 years. That was very rewarding in one sense. But I basically focus now on those charities that I've mentioned, which is important because, again, I think, again, from my own perspective, a sense of achievement is actually being able to help those charities and so on. And they all cover different grounds. When you leave the army as a senior officer, you do get rather a large number of people and organisations beating a path to your door, asking you to get involved. And I was quite choosy. I chose those organisations, those charities, which I felt I could add value, and actually there was a certain drive within me. And a good example is not only, obviously, Veterans in Action. The other one I do spend a bit of time and effort with is Ulysses Trust, particularly, and this is the one that supports the reserves and the cadets doing expeditions, but particularly the cadets. It's the young boys and girls in the military cadet forces in this country. If we can give them, and a lot of them are based, these are community cadets who are based in our bigger cities and what have you. And if we can give them a start in life as part of the cadets, when otherwise they wouldn't have that, then that's a real bonus.
Absolutely.
And again, it's activity-based. You know, we actually help them through money to run their own expeditions, both in this country and overseas. Yeah. So as young people, there's no better way of doing it. And one of the key metrics we use, which is interesting, we try and focus, not exclusively, but if a child as part of a cadet, if they are entitled to free school meals, we tend to measure that. So we see what impact we're having on the less well-off, the more impoverished children within this country. And that's, again, a very powerful motivator because those are some individuals who would never have a start in life.
Well, that's how I see the military as well. Like, you know, like I come from a pretty rough area of Glasgow, like Drumchapel. You know, my family all work, so I would have went into work. I know I wouldn't have went the other way, but the chances are you always can slip into that way. I think I didn't have much education because I knew I was joining the army and didn't do my exams in the end. I joined at 16 in 5 days. But what I've found is, in the military, it changes your whole way of thinking. I mean, you know, like the same as you're on about cadets. I was just a baby when I joined the army, like 16 in 5 days, in school Friday, in the army on a Monday. The army gave you a kind of a way of learning. And I mean, I remember a guy when I joined up who'd never been on a train before, and I couldn't conceive that coming from Glasgow, like, because that's all we did was go on trains to get everywhere. but that was reality. It brought all these people together from different backgrounds and everything, and you formed this thing together that was unbelievable.
I think it does. It makes you think about helping others and so on, because within the military, it tends to be what you're doing the whole time. Again, it comes back to this teamwork issue and what have you. And I think it's ever more important now. I mean, society in general, and I've used the expression, I feel people are gravitating, sadly, more to me rather than we. In other words, what can we do together?
Yeah.
It's more about me, which, is sad and what have you. So I think we need to think more about that in terms of how we do business in order to help others, to actually inculcate those values and what have you. I think it's really important in that sense. Churchill had an expression, and if I remember it rightly, which sort of rather summed it up, it said, we make a living by what we get, but we make a life by what we give. And that's really sums it up for me.
And I think in many respects, that's a great way to end this, isn't it? I mean, what a quote that is, isn't it?
It's fantastic.
Because it actually says exactly what it is.
Exactly.
And it's totally right. So that was Lieutenant General Sir Mark Manns. I think I'd like to call him a friend now. We've known each other quite a while. We got on incredibly well. We have lots of deep discussions here. I hope you enjoyed that podcast. I think it's a privilege to be able to talk to General Manns, and I hope for yourselves that you'll get some insight into the person as opposed to the OC or the CEO or the senior officer, that sometimes we don't get to know the person. He is a real person, and he's got a good way about him, and I think I'm very, very proud to have him as a patron of Veterans in Action. So please like, subscribe, do all the stuff, but most important, let us know your thoughts on the podcast by leaving us a comment, and we'll talk to you next time.
Thanks, Billy.